We're only screaming to scare them. Hello, my name is Will, and this is Exploding Helicopter, the podcast doing off-the-books missions to review films where helicopters explode. Now, when you think of the great directors of Italian cinema, you might think of Fellini, Pasolini, Bertolucci, Antonioni or Rosselini, and other people whose names end in I. But on this show, we're not looking at one of those glamorous, internationally lauded filmmakers. No, we're celebrating one of the unsung heroes of Italian cinema, a man who spent years in the trenches of genre cinema, often knocking out 3 films a year, usually with little time, money or resources. Yet, in spite of those obstacles, he managed to craft films that entertained audiences, all while putting his own creative stamp on them. So on this show, we're looking at Codename Wild Geese, one of the many films directed by Antonio Margheriti. And talking of men doing unheralded work in the dungeons of genre cinema, it's time to introduce my guest today. Disappointingly, his name doesn't end in I. It's Matt Poirier from Direct-to-Video Connoisseur. Welcome to the show, Matt.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here. Yes, I guess it's a French surname. I guess they don't do the I's as much as they do an Italian version.
Maybe we should just stick one on for the sake of simplicity onto this show, and maybe sort of adopt a bit of an Italian accent, or give a few words sort of an Italian flourish every now and then, just to stick with the theme.
Right, exactly. I think my last name is Pear Tree in French, so maybe like Pero or something like that in the Italian. I don't know, like De Peri or something. I don't know. That must be like the Italian version of it. There's probably an Italian Pear Tree, right? There's probably an Italian equivalent for Pear Tree somewhere, but yeah.
Yeah, if anyone knows the answer, do drop me a line and let me know. But it's great to have you on the podcast because I'm a big fan of your site. So why don't you give us a flavour of what you do over there?
Yeah, absolutely. I want to say likewise as well. I've always been a big fan of your site here. I think that for the direct-to-video film, I don't know if there's a trope that's bigger than the exploding helicopter, especially the DTV action. So it's definitely great for that. So direct-to-video Connoisseur started, I guess, in 2007. I don't want to say we've been doing it since because we've had multiple. I don't know what the plural is for hiatus, but we've had a few different moments where we weren't blogging like we should, but yeah, the idea is to spotlight these movies that they don't make it into the mainstream theater, that either go direct to video or have a very limited theatrical release that makes them essentially, that's where they make their money, is in the secondary market. And I think from the blog standpoint, we get the most I don't know what the word is, I get the most hits or the most response from the action films. It seems like horror and sci-fi, they don't quite have the same, they don't resonate. The DTV doesn't resonate as well, but action fans, it seems like they really love anything, but they seem to gravitate more towards the DTV one. So that's definitely what I've noticed. And it's like if I post too many horror films or something like that, I get very little response, where it's like if I throw up a Dolph Lundgren flick, everybody's like, yes, this is great. So I don't know if maybe it's from the action fan. You can, we sometimes maybe bigger isn't better with action. Like a bigger budget isn't better. That, as long as it's got what we want in it, it's got, a fight scene or an explosion every 7 to 10 minutes. That does the trick for us. So yeah, maybe that's what it is.
Maybe just action movie fans just very undiscerning. I don't know.
Right.
Maybe that's the worrying conclusion of all this.
Exactly. As long as the plot doesn't get in the way, everybody's happy. So yeah, for sure.
Well, for anyone who's listened to the Exploding Helicopter podcast, you may be familiar with my co-host Dara, who appears on many of the shows. And if he was here, he would probably be quite sniffy about the world of direct-to-video films. Dara has certain sort of aspirations to intellectual grandeur, which are sadly unfounded. But he probably doesn't. He doesn't. I know for a fact, look too kindly on the world of direct-to-video movies. So why don't you sort of make the case for them, Matt? What's he missing out on?
Well, I think the biggest thing is that I guess it depends on what kind of direct-to-video you're watching. Like sometimes, yes, it has an assembly line quality to it that you watch it and you're like, okay, this is just really bad. Or sometimes it has a quality to it where it's like you can tell the script has been passed from rewrite to try to save it, and it just ends up becoming this awful mess. And so it doesn't always work. But I think when it's good, there's I don't know if you say an earnestness to it. There's a fun quality to it that you feel like you're watching something that you don't have to take overly seriously. I think my favorite direct-to-video movie is a movie called Showdown in Little Tokyo that has Dolph Lundgren and Brandon Lee. I mean, that one is just ridiculous. I think it's like a 75-minute runtime. It did have a limited theatrical release, so it was in the theaters for a short period. But there's something about a movie like that you can't get on the big screen because, one, the budget has to make it. It has to be a certain length if it's got to have a budget behind it. So like a Fast and the Furious movie, it might be fun and over the top, but it's got to be at least 2.5 hours. The mainstream movie also, it has to go through so many arcs. So it's like, okay, the heroes do something. Oh, they fail. Okay, now they do something. Now they fail again. They can't, the bad guy has to keep winning until the very end when they finally beat the baddie at the end. And so we know everything is going to happen. Whereas a direct-to-video movie, it doesn't have to be that long, so we don't have to have so much of that, spinning our wheels kind of thing. And so that kind of part of it can be fun for me. Think of like the PM Entertainment movies. They're just like there's an explosion maybe every 10 to 15 minutes. Cars are getting flipped over, but there isn't a sense that like it's been overly focus grouped or that they've gone into and said, okay, like what are we going to do to get the maximum number of audiences to enjoy this? It's more like, okay, action fans, are you going to like this? Is this going to be something that works for you? There's that element. But for the action fan, I think DTV sometimes gets it right more than the big screen because they know what we want. They're going into it. We've got a $10 million budget. We're going to spend $9 million on explosions, the other $1 million on getting Steven Seagal in it for 10 minutes to like snarl a few times, and we can put him on the cover, and that'll do the trick. And so I think sometimes it does work a little bit better especially for action fans to see the DTV stuff. And I was surprised how much it resonated with a lot of people out there, that people were telling me about movies that I hadn't even considered before. So many people really did like this kind of thing. So it's definitely fun if you're an action fan. Yes, if you're into Fellini, and I'm a good fan of Fellini as well. Sometimes it's good to mix it up. You watch your 8.5 and then watch your Dolph Lundgren flick, and sometimes it works out better that way.
Okay, I think it's time that we got stuck into Codename Wild Geese. So here's a clip to give you a flavour of the film.
Well, I see you've got the cream of the crop here. Your people have been in every major conflict for the last 15 years, official or otherwise.
We didn't win them all.
Well, this one is not official, Captain, although we do have a rather large investment going here.
Set your mind at ease. I'll vouch for Captain Wesley. He'll get things done.
That's why we put this in your hands. After all, a front must have responsibilities, too.
Don't forget, Mr. Brenner will be open to reprisals.
Don't worry, Baldwin. I rather enjoy playing the role of the crusading philanthropist.
Can I get on with the subject, please? Thank you. Well, it's this way, Captain. You don't know me, and you've never seen me. Neither my country nor any of the other governments involved will ever recognize your operation officially.
We get paid. That's explanation enough.
Is it me or the method you don't like?
Would you like the straight answer?
Forget it. My informers will give me the final word tomorrow.
Codename Wild Geese came out in 1984. Despite the title, it has no connection to the wild geese other than in a desire to have you watch the film by thinking there might actually be one. As for the story, this centres on the international drug trade. In order to stop the supply of cheap heroin onto the streets, British and American law enforcement agencies sanction an off-the-books mission. The plan is to destroy the drug-producing facilities of General Khan in the jungle of Cambodia. To carry out the raid, an eclectic team of mercenaries led by Captain Wesley are hired for the job. It all seems fairly straightforward. They sneak into Cambodia and destroy the opium factory, but as is so often the case in films of this ilk, the mission suddenly gets a lot more complicated when events force their objectives to change and their escape route is compromised. The cast is led by Lewis Collins, who is the star of The Professionals, the action espionage TV series from the 70s and 80s. Alongside him are Hollywood greats Ernest Borgnine, Lee Van Cleef, and the idiosyncratic German actor Klaus Kinski. As we've previewed, the film was directed by Antonio Margheriti, here working under his regular alias Anthony M. Dawson. Margheriti made films from 1960 through to the late 1990s, and worked across many different genres: science fiction, sword and sandal, horror, Eurospy, spaghetti western, war movies, action movies, you name it, he made it. While his films often were inspired or perhaps ripped off from other better movies, he's earned something of a cult reputation because despite often very difficult limitations, his films, frequently have something very interesting, entertaining, or original going on within them. So with all that out the way, let's get stuck into sort of the review of the film. So Matt, what's your history with Antonio Margheriti, and what did you make of Codename Wild Geese?
So in terms of Margheriti, the only movie I'd done of his before was Hunter from the Future. So I had been planning, I'd had him on my radar to do more of his films. So when we did this one, I ended up watching Commando Leopard as well, and I'm looking to hopefully do the Commander, kind of do the full arc here. But I think one of the things I like about Margheriti, when I think of some of these Italian low-budget filmmakers like Bruno Mattei and Castellari, there is I don't want to say a cinematic – I don't know if that's the right word, cinematic quality, but it seems like they come from the same school as like Fellini and Rosselini and all of them, and then somewhere their paths diverge. And so then they Margheriti starts making these kinds of movies, but he seems to understand cinema in a similar way, that you get certain inspired shots here and there, or it looks different from like an American DTV film that might be done by a stunt director or something like that, who's just put behind the camera and told to make it work and we'll fix it all in post. Margheriti's not thinking we're going to fix it all in post. He's going to make the movie. So that's something I do appreciate about these, and I thought this film had that quality. And the movie overall, I thought from an action standpoint, it seemed like there was no point where it got too – I mean, I guess the beginning where he's flying around Hong Kong doing stuff, that could have been a little bit – but that was probably the only area where we didn't have a lot of action. But it seemed like for the most part we had a good action quotient, good explosions, that kind of thing, which I appreciate with a movie like this.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I mean, I think this film, it's got lots of actions. Certainly, I think once the film gets going, and it doesn't take that long to get going, I think once you're past the first 15 minutes, it's, there's regular action every so often. There is huge explosions in this film. There's no shortage of action. There's some really sort of cool moments along the way. But I think for me, ultimately, I thought this was, very solid but unspectacular film. I mean, it's good. It never gets boring. It moves along. But for me, I felt that it lacked a certain sort of je ne sais quoi. I feel that this film, it could have done that in a variety of ways. It perhaps could have done something with the characters. I mean, there's good action in here, but I'm not sure that there's anything in here that's hugely standout. Or maybe if the dialogue had been a little bit quirky, it just needed, I think, one of those elements just to be a couple of notches higher, and I think that this film would be really elevated by that.
Yeah, I agree. I think this is the kind of one where if I were watching this with my friends or something, people would start going to their phones probably, that they would, and look up for the explosions and things like that. But they would probably be, playing around on Facebook or whatever. And that's one thing I noticed. It was a little unremarkable in that sense, that it wasn't like one of those blow you away kind of, no pun intended with all the explosions in the film, but it wasn't. I know what you mean there. It was like it was fun for me, as an action film. I had things that I could pick out and riff on and things like that. But yeah, it was the kind of movie that might be find something, be distracted or get distracted with something else kind of thing.
And I don't know what you thought, but for me, I thought that this film actually could have been a little bit better, because it seemed to be laying the groundwork for certain things which then ultimately never were exploited within the film. So the whole opening sequence sets up Captain Wesley, who is the leader of the mercenaries. It sets him up as this bit of a hard bastard character. I mean, he sees he basically is running this training exercise, and somebody's fatally wounded during this training exercise, and he doesn't really seem to give a damn about that, and his men are grumbling about Wesley as a commander, and you sort of think, okay, right, it's setting up this element of him as a character, and how's that going to play out with his team of men sort of later on the film. But it never does play out, and There are other characters within the film where, again, it seems like, okay, they're going to play a role later on in the film. So there's this journalist character who crops up about halfway through the film, and she might as well have not been in the film, in terms of like her participation, sort of in the action. And, there are some other elements here which I just thought, it sort of lays the groundwork for stuff, but they don't go anywhere. And you just think, well, if you'd done a little bit more with that, maybe this film then would have stood out in the way that we're both sort of wishing it perhaps had.
Yeah, and I think with that character, with that journalist character, that was kind of like a dark turn in the film that I don't necessarily know that we needed either. I mean, first off, like, I couldn't tell, like, they showed her I guess they were supposed to be puncture marks from being injected with heroin or something.
Yeah.
And at first when I saw that, I thought they were like burn marks. I thought like they'd been torturing her by burning her with cigarettes, which I thought was like really, that's like real macabre there. I don't really need that. But then after I was like, okay, that's a real weird way to, I'm not someone who's familiar with using heroin, but it seems like it's not like you just like kind of just go up and down your arm, like, making a nice line of holes. So that also seemed weird, but also it really only had the effect of, I guess, like when she was helping out the guy who was sick, she was having trouble determining if she could give him morphine without taking it herself. And yeah, it was kind of just thrust in there. I did have a feeling like this script seemed like it was cobbled together, like a few different scripts cobbled together. Like there was that point where when we first get Ernest Borgnine in the film and he's talking to Lewis Collins, and he just starts like everybody's saying things. It seems like they're almost like non sequiturs. Like, Lewis Collins is like, as long as the money is good, I'll do whatever you want. And then suddenly Ernest Borgnine says, is it me you don't like or the methods? And it's like, I think somebody missed a line somewhere. Like there was something missing there or something. And I don't know if maybe too, it was like, if somebody did miss a line, we've only got Ernest Borgnine for a short period. Let's just go with it. I don't know. But yeah, the other thing was that Arbib character where they sort of set up that he's making money for his family. And I guess that's why he sacrifices himself with the train later. But because there's like nothing in between with this character, it's just sort of like we place this here, we're going to place that there. And a lot of those things weren't fleshed out as well as it would have been nice to see.
Yeah, I completely agree. And, going back to what you were saying about, Lewis Collins' character, Wesley, in that one scene, he's talking about, well, I'm happy to do this if the money's right. But at the beginning of the film, it sort of sets up, he's got this dead son who it later turns out was basically a victim of the drug trade. And so that is presumably his motivation for taking part in this mission and, for continuing on in this mission later on when the situation gets, much more complicated and a lot more hairy. But again, that kind of comes back into the film right at the end, but there's absolutely nothing in between. So it sort of doesn't carry any weight whatsoever in the movie. And with what you've just identified, and these other examples, there are these ideas of arcs for the characters, which they just are like bookends. They have a bit at the beginning and a bit at the end, and there's just, there's no meat in the sandwich.
Yeah, exactly. Now, I was wondering with Lewis Collins, because, we didn't get the professionals here in the United States. I just kind of looked the show up after. But, I mean, was there a sense that Margheriti was trying to somehow make him like a James Bond-ish character plus, a soldier or, a kind of mercenary for hire, like with the way he's walking around Hong Kong with his white suits and his white blazers and everything. Like it seemed like even there was an inconsistency where you get this really cool character as he's going around Hong Kong, kind of saying sly lines and driving and everything. And then in the movie, he's sometimes it's felt like a lot of the action was sort of farmed out to the other characters. And he's just walking around like looking things up on a computer and stuff like that, where maybe we needed more of him like taking care of business in different parts. Like every once in a while he'd have a fight or something, but maybe we needed more of that. And I don't know if that's part of it too, is he was inconsistently created. Like if Margheriti didn't know what to do with him.
Well, one aspect of this film we really need to look at are the special effects. So, like a lot of films of this era, some of the big set pieces in this film were made and executed with the use of models or miniatures. But unlike a lot of those films, it's not just a few key shots that are achieved with model work. So in this film, entire sequences are completed in that particular way. And I'm just going to put this out there, Matt. I thought the model work here in this film was absolutely phenomenal. I don't know what you made of it.
Yeah, I mean, that train scene, I thought that was like Buster Keaton's the general on steroids there. I thought that training explosion was fantastic. The car one I originally thought I didn't like as much, and then I saw it again, and actually I kind of came around on it. Yeah, for sure. I thought that was really exceptional about this film, to see how he did that.
Yeah, because the car chase that you mentioned, I mean, this takes place at the beginning of the film, and it's really quite unique because the whole sequence of this car chase, which it takes place in a tunnel, and some crazy stunts where the tunnel is cylindrical and the car's using the kind of the slope of the side to be able to sort of go up on the side and sort of dodge round obstacles that are in the vehicle's way. And, they're not just using models or miniatures for a couple of shots of the things that may be difficult to do as practical effects. The entire car sequence is basically done with miniatures, and there's a few sort of cutaways to Lewis Collins and as Borgnine sitting inside like a real car, like supposedly reacting to what's happening in the rest of the sequence. But for all intents and purposes, everything else, all of the vehicles, all of that is done through miniatures and model work, and I thought this is incredibly realistic.
Yeah, and I think when we think of kind of the modern filmmaking where you're using computer generated graphics and you're using as much as you can to create that, the fact that he did that so well, and also the fact that as you mentioned, he started in the 60s as a filmmaker, and so he's going through this progression of different types of film stock where maybe something that would have worked on 1960s film stock, with the 80s film stock, it's a little bit better. You need to make it a little bit nicer, otherwise we can see those flaws. And I think the way that he was able to do that, and like you said, with that chase scene, that was another thing too that I think when I first watched it, I didn't realize how much of it was in model. And I watched it again last night just to get a better sense of it. And it is amazing, like how much he was able to do with that. And like you said, just spliced in pictures of shots of Ernest Borgnine reacting kind of comically there. I think he was trying to earn that Oscar again, maybe not trying to earn that Oscar again. But that was I agree with you there. I think that the fact that he could do that, and it does, I think it also does a little bit betray it kind of makes us pine for more when we see these action sequences that are just like guys walking around with machine guns and stuntmen just kind of shimmying and dying when they get shot with the machine gun fire, that you're kind of seeing that seem like almost perfunctory. And then this is just so next level that for sure it was. Maybe that's part of why we thought maybe the rest of the movie was unremarkable.
Yeah, I mean, and I think the other sequence that I want to draw out is the one that takes place towards the end of the film, where they're kind of raiding this facility, because the actors are on location, and all of obviously they can't afford to actually blow up the location where they're filming, so the model work and miniatures are used for the sequences where the explosions need to go off and where buildings are blown up. And the thing that I was really marveling at was how closely the models and the miniature work matched the locations where they were filming. And I just thought that obviously the car chase sequence, it's the whole sort of tunnel bit, they're just used, it's a completely invented location in terms of the model work, so it's all pure model work. Whereas with that sequence at the end, whoever was creating these models and miniatures was having to match the shots that Margheriti had filmed on location. And again, I just thought, what a phenomenal job they'd done to match the models to the locations.
Yeah, I agree. It was amazing that you really had to pay attention to know if it was the building being blown up or the model, which I agree. That was really a cool thing. That was another thing I had to going through a second viewing. I picked up on that a little bit more, like, oh, that was a model there. So he fooled me a couple times before. That's how good they were, that I didn't realize, I took for granted that they were just blowing up an old building that they didn't need anymore. And it's like, no, that was a model that they created. So I agree with that. It was amazing that kind of attention to detail. And then we talk about the characters not being fleshed out properly. That, that maybe that's where, Margheriti wanted to make his money with this film, was to give us an experience like things were really being blown up or the car chase was really happening, and he wanted to make that as real as possible. But I think that's where he did succeed for sure.
Well, let's look at some of the cast and characters in this movie, and we've mentioned that there are some big names in here. We've got Lee Van Cleef, Borgnine. There's Klaus Kinski. I mean, who amongst the actors stood out for you for either good or bad reasons?
Well, so Kinski is part of our direct-to-video connoisseur Hall of Fame. So he's the one that, if I were coming to this independently, he'd be the reason, I would have come to the movie probably. And I think, we joke about this. Maybe it's like, I don't know if it's like a Chekhov's gun approach with Kinski, where it's like, if you have Kinski in the movie, he has to be a baddie. So it's kind of just waiting for that. But I thought he was fun for the few scenes that he was in. I did get a kick out of him wearing a jumpsuit, which was kind of funny that he's like, wearing with like the members only jacket, like, flaps on the shoulder. So his outfits were hilarious, but he did really well there. And I did like the scenes between him and Borgnine, because I think Kinski's always had this like anti-Hollywood slant. And then here's Borgnine, who's won an Oscar. So I think that kind of, the way we see acting, that's supposed to be like a real mark of talent if you get an Oscar. And Kinski would never, he's probably the kind of guy who would have like Brando'd it and just said, I won't accept it or something like that. But, the scenes that they had together, there seemed like there was legitimate tension between them, just, beyond just the characters. And that was something that I enjoyed as well. So, I would have liked to have seen more of Kinski perhaps in the film, but I think the amount that I got was good. I think Lewis Collins handled enough that I didn't need Kinski all the time in the film. But I enjoyed that. I enjoyed Lee Van Cleef's character as kind of like a wisecracking character that, he kind of was known for in the 60s in his movies. So I thought that was good too. And of course, it's always funny whenever you get an actor who's won an Oscar in a film like this. That's just always, for me, that's always, I just kick, and I thought Marty was a great movie. I'm not saying that Borgnine didn't deserve the Oscar he won. I thought he was great in that movie, but it's just always funny to be like, he's reading this bad dialogue or making these funny faces while he's supposed to be in a car that's turning upside down and stuff. And, I'm like he won an Oscar, so that I was getting a kick out of that as well.
In terms of Klaus Kinski, I enjoyed what we got from him here, but I wish he'd perhaps had a little bit more opportunity to sort of cut loose with his character. He's done some amazing films over the years, and I kind of don't really feel he sort of had the opportunity to sort of really cut loose here. Borgnine, I enjoyed his character here. I mean, he's one of those actors, like, even I've never seen Borgnine do a bad job. He's an actor who's had many ups and downs in his career, and he's been in some great films. He's also been in some terrible films, but Borgnine's always putting in a shift in, and he always brings something enjoyable. And I kind of enjoyed the sort of Boy Scoutish enthusiasm that he had as this character who was meant to be sort of organizing a sort of this black op. It was you kind of generally people running black ops tend to be deeply cynical, dour characters, perhaps with a hint of menace, whereas Borgnine, it seems to be organizing black ops missions seems to be the sort of biggest fun he could possibly have in his life.
Yes, and actually, the other thing too I liked about his characters, vis-a-vis Kinski, was that he kept talking about like what these guys have to do to save the mission, but then when it came time to maybe go in and potentially rescue them or help them out, he's like, well, I got to stay here. I can't go with you, And I got a kick out of that was like, because I think that was what the character was supposed to be. It was kind of supposed to be this guy who tells people what to do, but really doesn't want to get his hands dirty or, risk his own life, when it comes to it. And I thought that part of it was great. I did get a kick out. I don't know if we needed him shirtless, at that scene towards the end there. I think we could have done without that, that would have been okay. But yeah, and I agree with you on Kinski. We really only got the true like Kinski on 10 at the end when he was like almost being set on fire, and he's like screaming and stuff, and I don't know if part of that was like a lot of his voice was added in post or something, or it's just maybe one of those situations where the character wasn't fleshed out the way we would have liked. And so yeah, I agree with you there. I would have like more Kinski, kind of just doing Kinski like with like the Werner Herzog type, Cobra Verde or something like that. I would have enjoyed more of that too.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to be looking at the exploding helicopter action.
Alright guys, so we need to record our top 3 reasons why you should listen to French Toast Sunday podcast.
Number 3 should definitely be our diverse opinions.
Number 2 should probably be our top 3 lists that we do every week.
No, it's gotta be Mark Wahlberg.
What about Gwyneth Paltrow's head?
It's gotta be Fighting the Sadness in the Swamp of Sadness.
Full Frontal.
Stories about being lost at sea.
Brendan Fraser being underground.
Helen Mirren's boobs.
Baltimore accents as heard in The Wire.
Klaus.
Crepes. Character studies.
Wait, guys. What about movies?
Tree rape.
Tree rape? Yeah, I like tree rape.
Tune in every Friday for a new episode of French Toast Sunday podcast, brought to you by us at FrenchToastSunday.com.
We're back, and now we're looking at the exploding helicopter action. Our heroes steal a helicopter in order to infiltrate the drug lord's production facility. After blowing up the base, they're all set to make their getaway in a chopper. Unfortunately, one of the baddies runs up to the unattended whirlybird and uses the butt of their machine gun to smash the aircraft's fuel tank. The act of sabotage is spotted by heroes who open fire, fatally wounding the villain, but as he takes his last breath, he fires at the ground, setting alight the fuel that's spilt from the helicopter. The flames race towards the chopper, which promptly explodes in a gasoline fireball. Matt, what did you make of the exploding helicopter action?
The explosion itself I thought was a little lackluster because it seemed like it just blew up the front, before the helicopter. But I did like the fact that the helicopter explosion was actually germane to the plot. Usually it's just like, oh, there's a helicopter here. I'm not going back to, Chekhov's gun again. It's like, if you've got a helicopter in an action movie, you need to blow it up kind of thing, that wasn't what this was. It was like, no, now that this helicopter's exploded, now they actually have to do something. It's not like a villain flying in and getting blown up. So I like that part, that it was germane to the plot, but the explosion itself was a little lackluster.
Yeah, I had a similar take on it because, it was a bit of a lackluster explosion. And also the budget clearly didn't run to actually blowing up the helicopter. So the explosion is quite clearly taking place in the foreground and not anywhere near the helicopter lest they damage it. So I mean it's a reasonably big explosion, but it's very clear that they're just trying to disguise the fact that they're not actually blowing up a real helicopter in this. One of the details though that I found quite amusing and interesting as an exploding helicopter aficionado was quite how easy it was to burst that fuel tank with the butt of that machine gun. I mean, it looked basically like that helicopter was made of tinfoil.
Yes, it also, I think the gasoline looked like sangria or something like that. It was like flowing. It was like a purple liquid that was flowing out of there. And yeah, I noticed that as well. Like it was like kind of like just like it was like a tinfoil or some kind of like he just kind of ripped it open and. Yeah, and then I noticed the actual way to make the explosion. Of course, this came out before Wolverine X-Men Origins, but it was that idea of like you light the fire and then the fire goes and it's sort of like the flame eventually reaches the helicopter and makes it blow up, as opposed to just blowing it up directly with like a bazooka or something. But yeah, I did notice that as well. That it was very easy to break, and instead of trying to use gas, they used some kind of purple liquid for the fuel.
I mean, one other piece of information I think it's germane to throw in here is that, in terms of the kind of exploding helicopters, Antonio Margheriti is actually, a hugely important figure because, so far in our sort of decade-long investigation of this particular film trope, Margheriti is actually the director who has included an exploding helicopter in the most number of films. So far, he's included exploding helicopters in 6 of his films, which makes him the number one film director of exploding helicopters.
Yeah, I'm not surprised now that because having watched Commando Leopard, it was like there were helicopters exploding all over the place in that one. Right? It was like like Lewis Collins had like I don't know what that is, that the attachment on the bottom of the gun, and causes. So yeah, that's interesting that it's funny. Maybe that makes sense that he would make a movie where the exploding helicopter actually plays a part in the plot, considering he's done it so many times. Because that was one thing that I did like about this, that it wasn't that the helicopter was exploding just to explode, but now they're in trouble because of this.
Yeah, it was good. I agree. It was nice that the exploding helicopter actually had that sort of integral part into the plot and wasn't just used as as punctuation to a particular action scene. So I'm in terms of investigating Margheriti's CV, I'm going to have to sort of work through some more of his films to find out what his full tally of movies is, because I'm also the person who is hot on Margheriti's heels is Cirio H. Santiago, who's got 5 exploding helicopters to his name. So I'm going to have to sort of finish working my way through their CVs to see who ultimately is going to come out on top as the most important director of this particular movie trope.
Yeah, that's interesting you mentioned Santiago, because I think he's like he's in that same milieu of like what do we call it? Like I think there was a blog in the past that was called like when the Vietnam War raged in the Philippines, where I think there's that exploding hut genre of, I know Santiago also does a lot of like post-apocalyptic things where it's just sort of like taking cars and putting spikes on them and things like that, and having Richard Norton or something like that run around and David Carradine, but yeah, it's one of those things. I wonder too with Santiago, I get a sense that he may be recycling exploding helicopter footage. Like I wonder, if we looked at it, like if it's like the same helicopter blowing up in different movies the way that he does it. But yeah, it's interesting how with a lot of these films that take place in Asia like that in the 80s that involve former Vietnam vets, or it's even taking place in Vietnam or something like that seems to be a big part of it. And maybe that's because of Rambo. Rambo was big on blowing up helicopters, and maybe they feel like, well, if Rambo's blowing up helicopters and we're making these movies to make them kind of Rambo-ish, like we need to do that as well.
The one final thing I think I want to mention in this particular section is it's not related to the exploding helicopter, but I feel it does need to be mentioned, is at the end of this movie, we get Lewis Collins and Lee Van Cleef, flying around this opium producing facility, and they've hooked up a flamethrower to the landing skis of the helicopter which they're flying around in, and they are burning buildings, they're burning people, and ultimately frying Klaus Kinski with this flamethrower they've hooked up to a helicopter. And as someone who enjoys helicopters in films, I thought that I've never seen a flamethrower on a helicopter before, and I thought that was seriously cool.
Yeah. I mean, it did make me wonder, like with the baddies that were getting torched. Like I don't know, for me, if I would be trying to fire at a helicopter that's got a flamethrower, I would like run cover as soon as I could. But yeah, I agree with you there. That was really cool, and it was a really great way, I think, to mitigate maybe some of the issues of the budget, to have flames everywhere and just sort of be able to prop up flames and everything. And yeah, I thought that was a really great way to do that. And once that helicopter is unleashed on us, it comes out of that garage, it's just a free for all where it's just Lewis Collins is running around torching everybody. I thought that was really great. I mean, we had seen enough of stunt guys shimmying to their deaths or falling from great heights when they get shot from Watch That. We'd seen enough of that at the point, so maybe Margheriti understood that, like, we needed a new way to do this, and I agree, that was really inspired the way he did that. Yeah.
Okay, I think that just about wraps things up for this show. Matt, many thanks for joining me. Do you want to take a moment to tell people about where they can find you online?
Yeah, so the blog itself, it's dtvconnoisseur.blogspot.com. We got rid of the old Matt Movie Guy domain. I'd let that lapse. So it's dtvconnoisseur.blogspot.com. And then you can find us on all the main sites. So we're on, I think we're DTV Connoisseur on Instagram, Direct to Video Connoisseur on Facebook. Twitter is at DTV Connoisseur, and then at DTVC on Tumblr. So we're all those. And then also we have a podcast that's on TalkShoe. You can find the link for that on Facebook or the Instagram site.
Thanks, Matt. And as always, don't forget to check out the Exploding Helicopter website. You can also find us on Facebook, Tumblr, Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd, all the usual sorts of places. We'll be back soon. But until then, keep watching the skies for those exploding helicopters.
This podcast is a proud member of the Lamb Podcasting Network. Find the network at largeassmovieblogs.com.